Work hard and be happy. That's the best revenge for all your non-lovers. My mother's words echoed in my mind as I sat down, coffee in hand, contemplating the whirlwind my life had become. She always told me that success was the best way to prove people wrong, and boy, was I proving people wrong. I wasn't one of those people who brag. In fact, I was the opposite. Growing up, I was the quiet, studious kid who always did what was expected, attending every class, completing every assignment. While I wasn't at the top of my class, I did everything I could with the knowledge I had. My grades weren't straight A's, but they weren't too shabby either. Still, it wasn't the grades that fueled me. It was the drive to learn, to know people's stories, and to understand how they achieved success. I was fascinated by people, their triumphs, their failures, and most importantly, their perseverance. After high school, my path was clear. I enrolled in journalism school. I didn't go for fame, but for the opportunity to listen to people's stories and tell them. College life was a lot like high school for me. I wasn't the loudest or the brightest, but I was the most dedicated. I took every task seriously, made sure my assignments were done on time, and got deeply involved in all the training. My professors didn't always call on me, but they didn't need to. I was consistently there, absorbing everything. And then came the time for internship. After 2 years of hard work, I got placed at a prestigious city newspaper for my practicum. It was exciting and terrifying, but mostly exciting. From the moment I stepped foot into that bustling newsroom, I felt like I had found my place. Within weeks, I became the go-to person for any challenging story. I stayed late, worked on projects no one else wanted, and threw myself into every aspect of the job. The editorial team began to notice me, and by the end of my practicum, I was offered a permanent position. I wasn't just a journalist anymore. I was a part of something big, something that mattered. It felt like the culmination of all my years of dedication, and I was proud of it. Over the next few years, I worked like a machine. I stayed after hours, covered stories no one else dared to touch, and often rewrote entire sections to make sure the newspaper remained at the top of the game. My relentless work ethic paid off. By the time I was 28, I had worked my way up to editor-in-chief. Life seemed perfect, but as we all know, nothing lasts forever. Just when everything seemed to be going smoothly, Emily happened. Emily, the daughter of one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the city. She was blonde, impeccably dressed, and carried the aura of someone who had never had to struggle for anything in life. Her father owned several businesses in the city, one of which was a major investor in our newspaper. Naturally, this opened doors for her. Unlike the rest of us who had worked our way up, Emily simply waltzed into the newsroom one morning and took over. It was clear from the moment she arrived that she wasn't there to learn the ropes, she was there to climb them, and fast. The nepotism was undeniable. While I had worked my tail off to reach the top, she was simply handed a position beneath me, but one that placed her in direct competition with me. At first, I tried to be professional about it. I believed that hard work would always triumph over privilege. I figured Emily would learn the ropes, face some challenges, and either grow into the role or realize it wasn't for her. But I underestimated her. Emily didn't come to play fair. She came to win, and in the dirtiest ways possible. At first, it was subtle. She'd undermine me in meetings, suggesting improvements to my ideas that made it look like she was the visionary while I was stuck in the past. She'd accidentally schedule meetings with writers or clients at times she knew I couldn't attend, and then conveniently take the credit for the deals I had set up. Fine, I thought. I could handle a little competition. But then she took it a step further. She started sabotaging my work. It began with small things. Misplaced files, documents I needed mysteriously vanishing just before deadlines. I thought it was just me being forgetful under pressure. But then came the bigger moves. One day, I handed in an important piece, an in-depth article I had spent weeks researching. The topic was sensitive, but it was crucial for the public. I submitted it to the publishing team, confident that it would make waves once it hit the stand. Except, that wasn't what happened. The next morning, I walked into the office, only to find everyone staring at me like I had committed a crime. The paper had gone to print with a version of my article, but it wasn't my words. The topic had been completely altered, turned into a nonsensical, almost satirical piece that embarrassed both the newspaper and me. People were furious, editors, readers, even advertisers. I immediately knew this wasn't just a mistake, this was sabotage. Emily had done it. I didn't need proof to know it was her. She had the access and the motive, and while I had been cautiously polite to her, she clearly wanted me out of the way. That was her power move. The editorial board called me in for a meeting. Although they knew it was out of character for me to make such a blunder, I could see their trust in me wavering. "How could this happen under your watch?" they asked. I had no answer. I couldn't prove that Emily had tampered with my article, and accusing her without evidence would only make me look paranoid and desperate. My reputation was bruised, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me quit. I didn't fall. I refused to crumble under the weight of Emily's schemes. I kept working, knowing that I wasn't finished yet. This was my passion, my calling. Journalism was in my blood, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially someone who had everything handed to her, strip that away from me. But things got worse. Emily escalated her attacks. She sent out fake emails in my name, booked interviews I had no knowledge of, and continued to change my articles just before they went to print. The more damage she caused, the more I realized she wasn't just looking to rise, she wanted me out entirely. I had become her obstacle, and she was determined to remove me, no matter the cost. One afternoon, after a particularly disastrous week, I sat in a local cafe, my head in my hand. I had been looking for a new editorial position for weeks but had no luck. Everywhere I turned, Emily's influence, or rather her father's influence, seemed to taint the waters. People knew her family, and in a city like ours, connections mattered. It was disheartening. I had worked my entire life for this, and now, because of one privileged brat, I was on the verge of losing everything I'd fought for. Just as I was about to leave the cafe, a man sat down at my table without asking. At first, I was annoyed, but when I looked up, I recognized him. This was Robert Thompson, the owner of the Daily Post, one of our main competitors. He was older, sharp-eyed, with an aura of quiet authority. His paper had been struggling in recent years, but it was still respected for its integrity. "Rough week?" he asked, his tone casual but knowing. I blinked, unsure of how much he knew. "You could say that." Robert leaned back, studying me. "Word around town is you're one of the best. Too good to be sitting here without a job." I didn't respond, unsure of where this conversation was going. He smiled slightly, a glint of something mischievous in his eyes. "How would you like to be the editor-in-chief of the Daily Post?" I almost choked on my coffee. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," he replied, leaning forward. "I've been watching you for a while. I know what's been happening at your paper. Frankly, it's a mess. You don't deserve that." "But why me?" I asked, still in shock. Robert shrugged. "I've been trying to outplay your old director for years, but it's tough when the opposition's got deep pockets and powerful friends. But now, well, I see an opportunity." "You're my opportunity." I frowned. "I don't want to be a pawn in some newspaper war." He chuckled. "You wouldn't be. I'm offering you control. Complete editorial independence. You run the show. I need someone who's hungry, someone who has something to prove. And frankly, I think you'd enjoy sticking it to your old paper by making the Daily Post the best in the city." There it was, the revenge card. I had never been one for pettiness, but after everything Emily had done, the idea of rising above it all, of proving to everyone that I could succeed despite her sabotage, was tempting. Very tempting. I stared at Robert for a long moment, then nodded. "I'm in." Taking over the Daily Post was no easy task. The paper had been in decline for years, and the staff was demoralized. But I was determined. I wasn't just going to make the Daily Post great again. I was going to make it better than the newspaper that had betrayed me. I worked day and night, bringing in new talent, fresh ideas, and launching investigative stories that put us back on the map. And slowly but surely, the numbers started to rise. Emily, meanwhile, was thriving on my old paper's prestige, throwing glitzy parties and making sure everyone knew her name. But behind the scenes, her reign wasn't as smooth as she projected. The newspaper had lost its spark. The hard-hitting stories I had overseen were replaced by fluff pieces and celebrity gossip. Sure, it sold well in the short term, but it wasn't sustainable, and readers were starting to notice. But the real twist came when one of Emily's stories landed her in hot water. She had published an exposé on a local politician, filled with damning accusations. Except, her sources were dubious at best, and as it turned out, one of them was completely fabricated. When the politician threatened to sue, the paper had no choice but to retract the story. It was a disaster, an embarrassment that sent ripples through the journalism world. Emily, the golden child of the newsroom, had tarnished the paper's credibility. Meanwhile, the Daily Post was gaining momentum. Our stories were sharper, more investigative, and the public loved it. We tackled real issues: corruption, social injustice, and environmental scandals, and people were taking notice. It was the kind of journalism I had always wanted to do, the kind of work that mattered. Months later, as I sat in my office, reviewing the latest headline numbers, which were stellar, by the way, there was a knock at the door. I looked up, surprised to see Emily standing there. She looked different. Not the polished, confident woman I had come to despise, but someone worn down, tired. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I hesitated for a moment before nodding. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I messed up," she admitted, sitting down. "Big time." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "That article, the one about the politician. I didn't check the sources properly. I was so eager to make a name for myself that I cut corners. And now, well, I'm paying the price. The paper's paying the price." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," she sighed, "I need help. I don't know how to fix this. And I know you hate me, but I figured, maybe, you could give me some advice." I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. She had been awful to me, but seeing her like this, humbled, vulnerable, it was hard to hold on to the anger. I sat there for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened, everything she had done. Then, I did something unexpected. I gave her advice. I didn't do it because I wanted her to succeed. I did it because I realized something in that moment. Revenge wasn't about destroying the other person. It was about proving to myself that I didn't need to destroy them to win. I had already won. I had rebuilt my career, regained my passion, and found success on my own terms. Emily left that day with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, and I went back to work, satisfied. The best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's success, and I had finally found mine.